is 7:03, and we will call Historic Review Board to order and ask first if there are public comments. I do not have any comment cards. All right, in that case, we will move directly to item number 3 on the agenda, public hearing, PC 19-126, GLUA 19-00043, and HR 19-00003. Historic review for new construction in the Katiman National Register Historic District. And because it's a public hearing, I want to read a statement regarding our procedure. We will now commence the public hearing for agenda item number 3, a request for approval of new home at 710 3rd Avenue in Kanema. The criteria for approval of a land use action are contained in Chapter 17 of the Oregon City Municipal Code. The proposed development must comply with applicable provisions contained in the Oregon City Comprehensive Plan. Generally, unless otherwise noted, if a request is found to be consistent with the municipal code, it is considered consistent with the comprehensive plan. If you wish to participate in this hearing, including challenges for bias or conflict of interest, you must complete the sign-in form located on the table in the front of the room and deliver it to staff. Please do so immediately. The chair will only recognize those who have submitted forms. Testimony will be taken in the following order. Number 1, the applicant. Number 2, testimony in support. Number 3, testimony in opposition. And number 4, a rebuttal by the applicant. When recognized by the chair, please come forward to the podium, give your name, address, and make your statement. All testimony, arguments, and evidence presented regarding this request must be directed toward the applicable criteria or other criteria in the plan or land use regulation which the person believes to apply to the decision. Please address only the applicable criteria for the decision. Please do not repeat testimony. If you wish, you may choose merely to agree with the previous speaker's comments. An issue which may be the basis for an appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals shall be raised not later than the close of the record at or following the final evidentiary hearing. Such issues shall be raised and accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the Commission and the parties an adequate opportunity to respond to each. Failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the decision makers and parties an opportunity to respond to the issue precludes appeal to the State Land Use Board of Appeals based on that issue. Failure of persons to participate in the public hearing, either orally or in writing, precludes that person's right of appeal to the City Council or Land Use Board of Appeals. Written testimony submitted prior to the hearing constitutes participation in the hearing. Failure of the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues related to proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow the court decision makers to respond to the issue precludes an action for damages in circuit court. Prior to the conclusion of the initial evidentiary hearing, any participant may request an opportunity to present additional evidence, arguments, or testimony regarding the application. The Commission shall grant such requests by continuing the public hearing pursuant to the standards contained in ORS 197.763. So, first question, do any board members have a conflict of interest or ex parte contact with the applicant?
No.
No.
I am a licensed real estate broker in Oregon, and in that capacity, I help buyers and sellers of residential property throughout this area, including in the Kenema and McLaughlin districts. The property under review is not for sale, and as a result, there is no actual conflict of interest. And while I do have expertise in market values in this area, any decision I make will be based exclusively on the applicable criteria. And for the record, I have had no contact with any kind with this applicant. Who has visited the site?
I have.
I have.
I have.
And we all have.
I didn't need to put my hand up.
Does anybody in the audience wish to comment or challenge a conflict of interest or ex parte contact regarding this application? In the absence of that, we'll move forward and ask for the staff report.
Thank you, Chair Basinger. I first want to enter into the record a few emails from yesterday and today. We received a public comment over the weekend, which was forwarded to the board. And then there were a few responses, reply alls, if you will, to that email. And so I have hard copies of them here. I want to make sure the board members all received those replies. So there was one from a response from Ken, a response from Claire, and then a response from John that was just to me. So I'll give you a copy of that. Okay. And then if any audience member wishes to review that information, feel free. We have hard copies of that. Okay.
Wait a minute. I guess I just ended up with the...
I didn't see. When did this come in? This came in.
Okay.
Okay, so this file number is HR 1903 for a new single-family home in the Kenema National Register District. The subject property is 710 3rd Avenue. It's 5,000 square foot lot, part of the original plat of Kenema. There is a channeled stream that runs through the middle of the property and then turns onto 3rd Avenue before continuing down to McLaughlin. And the property is within the historic overlay, Willamette River Greenway overlay, natural resource overlay, and the geologic hazard overlay. The applicant did submit applications for geologic hazard review and natural resource overlay review earlier this year. So those applications have been submitted. The reviews have not begun. Those as the applications are incomplete at this time. And so those are both staff level reviews. So when the application becomes complete, then we would review it as a type 2 application with public notice and then a staff report and decision. So here are some recent photos of the property. There are a few trees on the property. It's not clear, how what size they are. But all of the vegetation on the property would be regulated by the other overlay districts, natural resource overlay review. So if any tree removal occurs, mitigation is required. Neighboring property, 704 3rd Avenue. So this was approved by the board last year and is almost complete. You can see the view from the street there of that property. That's on a 10,000 square foot lot. And then the other neighboring property is 716 3rd Avenue. This is a home that was built, I believe, in 2007. 1997, sorry, I'm 10 years off. So 1997, new construction went through historic review under the old guidelines. So the site plan, we've got a fairly small footprint for this home. The applicant, I think, is intending to keep the overall disturbance area, including the footprint of the home and the driveway, less than 1,500 square feet in order to meet the requirements for the natural resource overlay district. So there's no garage, either attached or detached. So it's just a 20-foot wide driveway that is mostly in the right-of-way. The property line, if you can see my cursor here, the property line is right here. So the driveway is almost completely within the right-of-way. And then the porch would be almost right up to the property line here. And then the stream is shown in the channel right there. So the applicant proposes a vernacular style home. Again, the size and the mass is quite small due to the constraints of the site. And the design is very similar to the neighboring property that was just built. So the full width front porch with a hip roof, 812 pitch. Generally, the design meets the guidelines. Double hung windows are proposed. The overall square footage of the home is, let me make sure I get it right here. So the home's 18 feet wide, 30 feet deep. And sorry, I'm not finding the exact footprint or square footage, but it's 1.5 stories with no basement. So this is just a comparison to the house that was just built next door. Now that house does have a porch and staircase to the side, which isn't shown. So imagine a similar looking porch rail and stair on that house on the left. So this is just for comparison purposes. They're quite similar. The natural resource overlay district is, I mentioned it before, the entire property is covered by the overlay due to that stream and then the required buffers on either side of it. So this is an excerpt from the applicant's natural resource overlay application, and I'm not showing this because it is approval criteria of this board, but I'm just showing it for informational purposes. The creek is relevant to the overall National Register district. It's mentioned in the nomination of Kanema. So a portion of the stream is in a man-made basalt channel, and then kind of upwards up the hill, it's more of a natural ditch without a lot of man-made walls, maybe a few rocks here and there. And so the protection of this creek is, you know, relevant to the natural resource overlay review process, but also for historic review as well, because it's a creek that is mentioned in that nomination form and is part of the character of the district. There's also a wetland shown, a very small wetland that was found when the property was investigated by the environmental consultant. And that, so the footprint of the home would be where that wetland is, partially. And I'm guessing that the state would not regulate a wetland of that size, but if it does, then that, you know, there are state requirements as well that the applicant would have to meet. So there you can see where the house footprint is. The proposed setback appears to be about 7.5 feet from the stream to that corner of the house. And again, there's no criteria for setbacks, you know, no strict standards for that in the historic design guidelines.
7-foot reveal is remarkable.
7 foot?
7 inch. My apologies. And then, so the materials proposed generally meet the guidelines. The applicant did not specify the materials used for the porch. So there's a recommended condition that wood decking, railing, and stairs should be required. Now, lately, everyone's been asking to do composite decking. That wasn't specifically requested here, but if it's something that is desired, it needs to come up at this hearing, and if the applicant wants to do it, it needs to be requested today and approved by the board. So I had a recommendation for preservation incentives. One of those, I learned more information today, and I want to retract that recommendation, potentially requiring more information before I would want to make a recommendation to you on that. But first, the R6 zone, minimum setback for a porch would normally be 5 feet. This porch is almost at the property line, maybe a foot setback or so. And I think it's appropriate to allow the setback to be reduced in this case because it helps to separate the house further from the creek, and the amount of unimproved right-of-way there in between the pavement on 3rd Avenue and the property line is quite large. So there's a lot of space there, meaning the house isn't going to be up very close to the pavement of the street. So the second recommendation that I'm retracting is the recommendation to allow a 0 setback on the side, and that would have allowed the house to be further from the creek. However, this site plan appears that it might not be accurate as far as the placement of the neighboring house. I spoke with the neighbor, the owner of that property today, and he informed me that his setback from the property line is actually only 5 feet, whereas this showed about 12 feet here. So with 12 feet, I thought that the 0 foot setback might be appropriate. If this house was really only 5 feet from that property line, then I don't necessarily recommend moving this one even closer to that. So I think we don't necessarily, I don't have a survey, I don't have boundary surveys to reference. I only have the information shared with me by the neighboring property owner. So there shows the setback to the creek, and then that if you do measure 5 feet from that property line, then this house is actually right up here. So my recommended conditions of approval are pretty standard. Under the front porch, the applicant, I believe, proposed a diagonal lattice that should be perpendicular wood lattice. And then using wood for the deck, planting shrubs in front of that foundation of the home, that exposed foundation. And then making sure the porch rail includes a top and bottom rail. One thing that I want to potentially add is that I think the hardy plank siding was proposed. 7-inch reveal is perfectly fine for vernacular, but I don't know that smooth hardy plank was specified, and so I think adding a condition for smooth hardy plank would probably be a good idea. I apologize for not catching that earlier. So I am available for questions.
There's still a reduced setback on the west side with the current application?
So the current application is for a 5-foot setback, which meets the underlying base zone setbacks and would not require a preservation incentive. But the proposed front setback does require preservation incentive, or otherwise they would need to move that house back further on the lot.
So that's just the root on the site plan there. The way it looks, the way the line's drawn, it looks like there's an overhang a little bit there right now.
Oh, so I think the roof overhang?
It's just the roof.
Yeah, I believe that's that dotted line, dashed line there is actually where the wall
So the
of
foundation is just,
yeah.
Okay.
The actual footprint, yeah. So the 7.5 feet to the creek is counting the 5-foot setback?
Yes.
Okay.
And again, you know, this proposal may or may not meet the natural resource overlay requirements.
Is there any additional information that in the application, I guess, on the, so, you know, I visited the site, but I haven't walked up onto the property. What exactly, what part of the channel or the, you know, basalt structure in the channel is historic, and what the alterations would be to that part of it? Or
My understanding is that there wouldn't be any alterations to the basalt channel itself. You know, there would need to be probably some robust construction fencing to protect that area during construction. But there's nothing currently proposed to change or be modified about that stream or the channel, the man-made channel.
Any other questions?
The wetland, that small area, how does that affect, or does it? There's been no ruling or anything as far as that
Yeah,
small area that's being
right. So because the entire site is in our natural resource overlay, we require mitigation for any disturbance. So whether it's on that wetland or which we don't have mapped. So the city was not aware of any wetlands on that property. So our regulatory framework is based on the stream and then the buffer for the stream. So we don't regulate the wetland itself.
Right.
The applicant, if the state doesn't need to review it, or if the state reviews it and approves it, can fill that wetland. And then the mitigation that's required for the disturbance from our code is in the form of planting of native plants and removal of invasive species elsewhere on the lot. So the applicant's natural resource overlay application includes a mitigation plan.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you, Kelly. Is the applicant present? Come on forward and make sure your microphone is switched on and state your name and address for the record.
My name is Mark Zawadzki, and I'm owner of the 710 3rd Avenue in Kanima.
Okay. Tell us about your project.
Well, I think everything was said about it already. I just want to build a small little house there. I have a perfect lot. I think that building a house there would be an improvement for that street, and I can do it. You know, I think it's gonna look good, and it's gonna be good for Kanima.
You did a pretty quick construction on the other house.
Yeah, I
Happy
did.
to
And
see that.
this project I started in 2007. We already had NRAD done, and that 2008 was a big crash, so I walked away from it for a while, and I'm back right now. So here I am. I want to build. I just want to build.
Okay. Anything else?
No, the only thing I was thinking of it was that retaining wall that is in a creek over there, that basalt retaining wall. It's much farther back from where I'm going to do the work, so we're not going to disturb anything in there. The trees, there's 3 or 4 dead trees that has to be taken down anyway, so we have to cut them down. They are almost dangerous right now. They're totally dry. So my disturbance area is the minimum. I made the foundation to accommodate retaining walls same time. So the foundation retaining wall is going to be same, so I don't have to move anything backwards. It's going to be just, I just make it a minimum. I decided not to do the garage because there's not enough space, so we're going to have just a small driveway there. There's going to be a meeting about that December 4th because I need to get approval for retaining wall, which is going to be boulder retaining wall at the right of way. Otherwise, it's pretty simple. It's a simple, smaller house, good enough for a couple or single person. I like the neighborhood. It's gonna clean up that lot nicely. I think it's just a good thing to do, and I like to do that. So,
Questions for the applicant?
You do have the SHPO response, and I'm sure you got that, the State Historic Preservation Office about any burials or, you know, as you start to.
yeah, we talk about that. So I supposed to contact the. I think I did that 10 years ago, and then they didn't find anything over there. So that doubt cleared. But I'll make sure before I do anything that that's gonna be taken care of with the tribe.
Okay.
So you're saying you did that when you built the first house?
No, I did when I was trying to propose this project in 2007,
Oh,
and they didn't
okay.
find anything then. So I don't think this happened before.
Okay. But you didn't go down into, you know, digging and stuff?
No, we didn't dig anything.
Yeah.
But the tribe said that there's nothing in there, so they weren't concerned about it.
Okay.
So I don't think they're going to be concerned this time.
Okay.
But if we do
But I
any
think you
digging and
still
we find
need to-
something, we definitely will address that.
More questions? We thank you.
Thank you.
And is there testimony in support of the application? Testimony in opposition to the application? Come on forward.
My name is Garrett Mulder. I live next door at 716 3rd Avenue. And I'm quite aware of the dimensions there and where the water is. I believe the wetlands are much larger than you're suggesting. But the main thing is the dimensions. I know where I had to build my house, and I know I had to be 15 feet from the corner and 5 feet from the edge. My house is 30 feet wide and exactly 5 feet from the property line. And the drawing kind of shows the house being positioned kind of after the creek turns, but actually where it's going, it's actually going to be right along where it's going to go on straight for a certain distance. And dimensionally, you're talking about between my foundation and where that creek starts between 29 and 31 feet. We're cutting that run real close. I don't think you can technically do it without going right up to my property line, or within a couple of feet of that property. But one of the main things is that creek line could very easily change. It's basically a ditch. When I came in and before I bought the lot, it was 96, before the flood. I was thinking about it. Then the flood came and I had to go, I looked at the creek before, and I had to go look back during the flood to see what happened, It stayed and everything, but afterwards, the creek had changed its shape. And I believe a lot of the rocks that were lined up, so you had the engineered rocks along the street, but as you went around the corner originally, I think they just kind of lined rocks up. And I think most of those rocks are downstream, probably during the flood. But that creek has changed shape. It was definitely wider after the 96 flood than before. And I'll never forget that because I just remember it got wider. So it could happen again. So the dimension of that creek could change. I don't know how you dimensionally fit this house in there, one, and two, like say if you're cutting that lot, you're going to be right next to that creek on parts of it. Some of those boulders can be pretty big. I can see where you move a boulder and suddenly you've opened up the creek. I know I have my lot cut and there's some big rocks there. So I think this particular plan doesn't really fit the lot very well. I think I would, maybe there's a way, but this particular plan, I don't know how you dimensionally can do this and have it be appropriate. And I'm not going to let anybody build on my property line if they're going to be 5 feet away from my house. I know you can't build a house without being on my property line if you're building on the property line. I will not let that happen if there's any legal way I can keep it from happening. At some point, they're going to have their application in, and I'm going to have to sit down with an attorney and find out exactly where I stand. But I think this isn't the house for that lot, and maybe there is a way of designing around the circumstances, but I don't think this is it. Take this too wide in the back. Somehow, you would have to come forward and maybe over. And Statenwood is probably the drier part of the lot. The closer you get to my property line, the wetter it is. As it is, it's showing the middle of that being right where there's a whole bunch of water. I know where the water is. I've been catching it for years. And that was the first place I caught water, was right where the foundation of that, in the middle of that foundation. So I could see someone also having trouble there during really bad weather events if they were to use that first floor as living space. I could see water coming in or having some real issues that way, mold, whatever. But I think that particular design really won't fit that lot. I think I've used up my 3 minutes.
You have. I think that most of your concerns regarding the creek and the specific location of it are matters to be taken up when you do the natural resources hearing process. We don't have access to, and we're not experts in any of that stuff. So we deal here strictly with
There will be a
the
natural
design.
resource hearing? Will there be a hearing for the natural resource thing?
There's a natural resource committee that will
take it up.
hear it because of the NROD.
I'd like to be told when that is, and I didn't know there was, so.
It's a
Yeah, you
staff-
will be notified.
Thanks.
It's a staff level review.
I could only comment.
Oh, okay.
So that you'll get a
Stand
notice,
corrected.
and there will be a public comment period.
Yeah.
There is a natural resource review process that does go to planning commission in some cases. And I don't know that this is going to rise to that level. It depends on the details of the application.
Trust what she said,
Oh, no.
not what I said.
She's on top of it.
Regarding the setback to the property line, we've already heard from staff that the 5-foot setback will stand, and there won't be a request to move the footprint any closer to the property line than that.
I have a question. I think I've got my dimensions. So it has to be 7 feet to the creek?
No, that's what is proposed, is 7.5 feet, but there is no, there's no clear and objective minimum number. It is through the Natural Resource Overlay District. If the footprint of the home is this small, then there's no necessarily minimum setback from the stream.
Okay.
Any further questions?
Thank you.
Thank you. And now, the applicant, if you have any comments to respond to that, you're welcome to do so. If,
No, I don't really do have much. I just know my neighbor doesn't want me to build over there. He already proposed that 10 years ago that he wants to buy that property for me for like $1,000, which was funny to me. So he just doesn't want me to build, and that's what his concern is. And I know that creek is the same way it was before because the basalt wall, the historical wall is there, have never moved. I know there's some boulders in that ground because I did the house at 704 on 3rd Avenue next door. So I know there's some, but they were all to the size that we can move them without, blasting them with dynamite. So it's not that that's gonna slide to the creek and change the. Yeah, that's about it.
okay. I have no further comment cards here. So, in the absence of further comments, then we will close the public hearing and move to deliberation. And we'll start on my left.
Okay, well, I think the design of the house itself is completely appropriate to the neighborhood and the style. The size and massing is very reasonable for that site. So I don't really have any material concerns there. As far as the west setback, it looks like that's going to be fully compliant, so no issues there. On the front setback, preservation and incentive, what's being proposed is completely consistent with what we've granted in previous applications to allow the house to be sited while minimizing the impact on the existing disturbance of the geography and water and wetlands on the site. So I don't particularly see a problem with that, particularly given the distance that the property line is back from the paved street anyway. I think I would propose that we add a specific condition that the basalt channel and historic part of that not be disturbed as part of the construction. But otherwise, I think that's that. We did receive, the request to put the application on hold, but the request didn't mention any further, it wasn't based on any further evidence that would affect the historic review of the property, so I don't particularly see a reason to grant that continuance if it's not part of the historic review process in nature.
Blair?
I totally agree. And as far as the enclosure underneath the patio or the porch, the front porch, it's not diagonal as it points, it's going to be vertical.
I've recommended a condition that it be perpendicular.
I just was, noticing that there, but I, agree with everything Grant said. I think it's totally appropriate and, just as long as due diligence is done on the overlay, the wetlands and everything, so.
Can we go back to the staff recommendation for conditions of approval?
Yes, and I do want to add, I found the part of the narrative that talks about siding, and it actually does say smooth already. So the proposal is for smooth siding, and we don't need to add a condition for that. So here, this page or the next one.
I go back to prison.
I just wanted to go to see all of them again. Okay.
Gotcha.
Through the standard conditions.
Okay.
Does anyone
I will
see?
Move to approve GLU, it's HR 19-00003 for new construction in the Kenema National Register District at 710 3rd Avenue.
With the
with the additional condition.
Subject to the condition.
That the Salt Creek channel not be disturbed.
Right.
Okay.
and that the west side setback is removed, right?
Well, that's already in there. I
And
thought you
so-
took that out.
So
Yeah.
you would be approving it with the preservation incentive for the front setback and not for the side
Side
setback.
setback, right.
Correct.
I'll second that motion.
Okay. I don't know what order to go in now. Board Member Blythe,
Aye.
Board Member Met,
Aye.
and Chair Basinger.
Aye. The application is approved. And we will move on to the next item on the agenda, which is design advice for new construction in the mixed-use corridor in the McLaughlin Conservation District near Fifth Street and Monroe.
You're used
Yeah,
to Fifth Avenue
avenues.
in Kenema.
So we will start with staff report.
So this applicant actually has two projects in the works in the McLaughlin district, and has, even though the materials for the second project were not submitted and not on the agenda, they are requesting to talk about a second project as well, which is a mixed-use project at the corner of 7th and I think Monroe. It's the old Olson's Pharmacy.
Olson's Park, oh.
And so if the board agrees, then we would have a second project to look at for design advice. And you can potentially limit the amount of time that you want to spend on that tonight. But I will start with the 5th Street project, which was on your agenda. Let's see. So this is on the edge of the McLaughlin district on 5th Street, next to the Guild Mortgage building. It's kind of a 60s era low slung building. So this property is zoned mixed use corridor, and it is also in the geologic hazard overlay. Next to the property is unimproved right-of-way, and within that is a paved trail that leads up the hill towards the Rivercrest neighborhood. So that's kind of in this area right here. So the applicant has proposed let me see if I can break this down. Proposed a mixed-use development that consists of a small commercial studio on the ground floor with the entry door. And then the remainder of the building would be a single-family home with an attached garage. So I believe the applicant has described this as a bungalow design, bungalow style. I don't particularly think that it has a lot of bungalow elements, but the design guidelines for commercial development outside of the 7th Street corridor. So in the 7th Street corridor, we talk about streetcar commercial design. Outside of the 7th Street corridor, where the zoning allows for commercial or non-single family development, the guidelines call for Queen Anne or vernacular style that kind of looks kind of residential in nature, but is, can have a commercial use within it. So a bungalow design does not really fit the guidelines in this particular case, although in McLaughlin in general, bungalows are appropriate for single family homes. So the side elevation, so this is on the uphill side, and then on the downhill side, on the side of the Guild Mortgage building. And then the rear elevation. And okay, so here's the floor plan. So 5th Street is right here. Here's that attached garage, which does not, the guidelines call for detached garages, and certainly not garages on the front facade. Although the applicant did submit, along with this, for design advice, multiple photos of street-facing garages on 5th Street and in the general vicinity. And then you can see the small commercial studio here. And then the remainder of that is the residential use. And then the upper stories are the residential use as well. This meets the mixed-use corridor zoning as a live-work unit. It is a permitted use in the mixed-use corridor district. The applicant will also have to go through site plan design review for that, which is a staff level review that is required of any development in the mixed-use corridor zone. So I think we've looked at the elevations, and pull up the narrative. Which says locating the garage at the front of the structure is dictated by geologic hazard condition of the property. And then the photos that were submitted include a lot of single car garages that face the street. Some of these are on side elevations. So like this house faces the other street, and then this is the side elevation. So those were included as well. And so, I've mentioned some parts of the guidelines. I think there are a few other guidelines that this design doesn't necessarily meet. Overall, the massing is pretty large. So I think there might be some comments on that from the board, but I certainly haven't thought of everything. So see what the applicant has anything to say. That's all I have. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Is the applicant here? You want to come up and we'll talk about what is happening here. So you've heard what the staff reaction
Yes, thank you. John Delson Engineering. So we looked at the requirements for this particular site, and as you notice, perhaps we can pull the site plan, preliminary site plan.
I don't think we got a site plan. Sorry. I don't have a site plan, but I have that.
Yeah, the site plan shows that we had to take care of a couple things here to design the building on this side. First, we have to deal with the slope, as you can notice from the rear left side, sloping down towards the Guild Mortgage project. And more importantly, geotechnical hazard zone. So after preliminary discussion with the city staff and preliminary recommendations, we have to be aware and deal with the geotechnical hazard zone and with the slope. And we had a meeting with the city staff, 4 members of the Oregon City, and including the soil engineer who works for the city. And when we proposed the floor plans, everybody was in favor of this because city will not look in favor retaining walls higher than 8 feet tall. So we propose on the left side the garage. The garage will serve as a buffer with the retaining wall and the slab to prevent sliding. Okay, and the second city requirements is to have the commercial studio facing the street, 5th Street. So we had to put it on the right side, on the lower side. And the commercial studio must have exit or entrance front to the 5th Street. And the garage is located on the left side. As I say, we cannot have retaining wall and then the building. The garage wall will serve as a retaining wall, not to exceed 8 feet. And what you saw on the basement plan is the series of step foundation. And the geotechnical engineer who works for the city, he liked this approach. He said he does not see any problem with this approach. And we did hear only positive comments about this layout and this proposal from all the members attending the preliminary application. So based on the pre-approved floor plans, maybe we can show this floor plan again.
Yeah, I'm going to, I can pull up the site plan here in a second. Sorry.
If not, we can see from the elevation kind of how the ground works. But we also hire independent soil engineer to do investigation on this site. And this is according to his recommendation to develop this site as well, not only the city, but first of all, to meet the requirements, how to stabilize the soil and how to develop this. So this is the basement. And on the left side, you see at the bottom, the garage. And the bottom side will be all retaining wall, but step down foundation to minimize the cut, minimize excavation, to make it more economical and take care of all these 3 items. And the studio also facing the street. So the garage is pulled back according to some other city standards. The garage, they don't allow to be in front of the building. This is pulled to the back with the slope to the driveway about 15%, so we can minimize the cut, hold the soil. And based on this floor plan, we see the topography. Yeah. But
Did
the
you
site-
want to look at this site plan drawing?
Oh, this is kind of preliminary site plan. Yes, yes.
Yeah.
No, this is old one.
That's all I have.
We put studio on the back, but according to the new guidelines, the studio needs to be facing the street.
Okay. Well, that's the only one I have on our server.
I do have 24 by 36 page of the site plan, but nevertheless, from Fifth Street, you see how the slope is working here. So we developed these floor plans that we think fits the best, not only the geotechnical, the sloping condition, the city criteria, and what the owner wants accomplish. The owners have fairly large family, and this is the footprint, number of bedrooms that they require, and also the commercial studio. The commercial studio will serve the need of the owner because she's trained in medical field, and she's giving classes and training CPR and other classes. And there would be work and live to meet this criteria. Yeah. And based on this floor plan, we developed the elevations. If the committee feels appropriate, we can modify the elevation. However, the floor plan, we would prefer to remain as it is with the location of the garage and the studio, according to all these necessary requirements. The slope is, the lot is very difficult to develop. And realistically, walking down the street, we see many homes with the garages facing the street. So we don't think that this would necessarily compromise the requirements.
Well, as you know, the reason we're here is for design advice to make suggestions that will help you get through the process and the eventual design review. And in that regard, as I look at this elevation, I see some design cues thrown in there, but they look, well, they're not, I agree with staff that they're not elements of a bungalow style.
If I can interrupt, I don't know why the bungalow word came into play, to be honest, but we basically looked at the houses surrounding. We have the pictures. We see that this kind of, not necessarily bungalow, but this kind of style probably should fit the neighborhood. It's going to be much nicer, of course, than any of those homes around, but we can simplify or we can modify the look if we see the clear guidelines. However, as I said, the footprint and the design, the floor plans were dictated by all these important elements and requirements. So if you see some particular things that we can remove or add to the elevations, we are happy to do that without necessarily moving or removing the garage or the studio. Actually, it must stay where it is. We cannot flip it to the other side, of course, accessibility and other things. So,
but what is the siding, the vertical siding? What is that?
we can do button board or anything that will be appropriate. We are not set. It's not like, okay, we must to have this element or this element, this trimming or this siding, whatever. But
I think The first thing that you need to do is establish a clear theme that you're going with. You know, my 1994 house is listed as neo-Victorian.
Yeah.
And what that means is that the decorations on it support more or less a Victorian character. The rules today, 25 years later, are far more specific than they were then. So I doubt that the house I live in could be built today under today's guidelines.
Correct. Yeah.
But yours is going to have to comply with today's guidelines. So, Kelly, can you tell us again what the recommendations are for construction in the corridor?
Yeah, let me scroll to that page here. Okay, commercial building styles. Outside of the 7th Street commercial corridor, commercial uses shall employ a residential style architecture to better integrate into the neighborhood fabric. The larger residential styles such as Queen Anne, vernacular, and Foursquare are appropriate. They create a suitable transition to adjacent residential areas and can be built relatively close together to achieve appropriate density. These styles could be utilized for any uses, retail, office, or multifamily residential. The carriage building on High Street is an existing residential style structure used for commercial purposes. And so when, in addition to that, the Queen Anne and vernacular styles, I believe, have a maximum height of 2.5 stories within the McLaughlin district. So when they're being used as a commercial use, that might be a little bit different, but generally, you know, the way that this is worded would potentially require a slightly shorter building as well.
So you're looking to work within the general floor plan that you already have. And what I see in looking at it is that it's not going to be easy to make that conform with either the Queen Anne or the vernacular styles, but I think the Foursquare style could probably work for you on that.
Would you provide some samples
Examples?
of that style? Yeah.
If you go,
Pet's old house.
yeah, and there are some down on High Street as well, in the vicinity of 4th or 3rd Street. There are a couple of I think they're both duplexes, but they're basically Foursquare style. And
Foursquare is a variation on the bungalow, usually, and it has not as much, you know. I guess I have, my biggest problem is just the massing of it. And with all the architectural detail that you have showing on this, to me, it would make it like, you know, in your face kind of thing, where I think with the Foursquare, some of the design elements from that, they're simpler. The mass talks for itself, but how high, and then this is against the landscaping, or it's going up, so it kind of will sit into the right, but it'll, it's just huge.
We were thinking 2-story actually, but with the city requirements that we need to push the studio to the front. We had to redesign, and here it is, and there is no other place for the studio. and the 2 stories on top.
I think that looking at the 4 square would be a good idea because you generally would have a hipped roof on the front, which will kind of bring down some of the height a little bit, but still allow you room to have potentially loft up a 3rd floor or have finished space up there. A couple other details, and these kind of go to Ken's comment that I would maybe step back to kind of the high level and pick your overall style first and then go to the details. But, when I look at this, a few things, the side light, the single side light on the entrance that's in the middle, without having the symmetry there is maybe a little unusual. Same thing with the studio entrance being kind of asymmetric to the windows there. More, generally speaking, would prefer to see a little more symmetry. On the left elevation, it looks like there's some horizontal sliding windows. Casement windows would probably be okay, but horizontal sliders generally aren't something that we like a whole lot. On the right elevation, there's, along with the divided light windows, there's some really large, glass as well. And so it's the consistency there is a little bit, I guess, I'm not sure what the idea is. On the garage, for, some of the mitigating factors that we've used to approve attached garages are that they're not on the main elevation of the home. They're not on the front facade of the home. The geography requires them. Potentially, in your case, the geography is a little difficult and the terrain on the site, but the garage is kind of front and center and displayed, and so that's certainly not ideal. So I would, generally prefer to see a detached garage there, especially if there's space, which it seems like there is on this site.
Yeah, actually, if you look at the site plan, there is no way to put the garage detached. One thing, as I was explaining, because of the sloping condition, the geotechnical requirements, and I explained that the retaining wall and the slab in the garage serves as a protection against sliding. And again, we found like about 6 homes on the same street, the same block, with the garages facing the street.
And I guess one thing to look at is that I would imagine that the garage can serve as the retaining wall there without being attached to the main structure of the home still. It could still be in the same location without being physically attached to the main residence.
Can we have the floor plan? Main floor plan. Yeah. So the garage.
Yeah, I do.
So this is the basement. Yeah. The garage appears to be detached for about 14 feet, but then of course we have to have entrance from the garage to the main building, and on main floor plan, that's the basement. If we can show the main floor plan.
This is the only one I have, except for the old version from your meeting, so. Is this it? That's ground floor?
Yes, that's the.
And you want the next one?
No, don't. This should do. Yeah, so we see, we have the entrance from the garage to the stairs. Have to go up. Yeah, so if we detach, so we would have to eliminate the entrance, so to speak, right? Mm-hmm. I don't see how is it geometrically possible. But visually from outside, it's like 14 feet space between the garage and the building. All the other 6 homes out of 8 have just basically attached to the building. Not to mention that the Guild mortgage, I don't know if you're familiar with this building. Have you seen this building? No matter what we do, we will not match that neighbor. From any point of view, historical, aesthetical, or anything. And this house, this building,
the 1960s
Yeah, this is
style
what
building,
on
used to be
Fifth,
medical.
yeah.
medical
Guild,
center.
Yeah.
Guild mortgage. It's a one-story with almost flat roofs. And so no matter what we call this new style, will never match the neighbor. We call it historic, non-historic, contemporary, whatever we do, will never match the neighbor. But the idea of the garage, as I say, is taken from that street. So I understand the guidelines are guidelines, but the guidelines should be guided to that block or this area, not necessarily 2 blocks from there or half a mile.
But most of those are either like they're single car, you know, and smack up against the house, and they're set back more, or they're built underneath the house as part of the, you know, which was a style that was very common back then.
There was once 1-car garage and 2-car garages. We have pictures, but we could reduce to 1-car garage if that's the problem, I guess.
Well, if you did that, then you could have it, if it was a 1-car garage, then you could have it as a separate structure.
Not
Yes.
not a good idea, but as I say, if we cannot have 2-car garage, we could reduce from 22 to say 10 more feet, have 1-car garage if that makes the big difference. But again, from any reason, you know, entrance from the garage to the house would be desirable. Yeah.
Because to me, it's almost like, it's because it's right there on the street front, you know, on the front of it, it stands out more than any of the ones, you know, that are built into or under the house.
The other homes, they have garages in front of the house. This one is in the back of the house. It's not like popping out. Usually, I know in some jurisdictions, it's not allowed to have the garage in front of, like City of Portland. You cannot have garage the same front line or in front of the house. Well, that's what we see on the 5th Street, actually. The garages are, number one, the houses behind, whether 1-car garage or 2-car garage. So matching the neighborhood, we did the garage, but it's pulled back 6 or 8 feet.
Yeah, it looks like 8 feet.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would, if in your final application you keep the garage on that side, I would look at having a full car length setback from the front entrance of the home, or from the front edge of the foundation there. So it looks like there's.
Could you repeat, please? I didn't hear that.
So so I'm not necessarily saying that this would be approved or anything, but if you do keep the garage on the front for your final application like this, I would suggest that at minimum you try to keep the setback to the garage door at least a full car length back from the front boundary of the structure.
This is architecturally it's possible. From geotechnical engineering point of view, you are going up against very aggressive slope. So unfortunately, we are limited by the terrible sloping conditions and so-called geological hazard. Yeah, so that's why we had a pre-application with the city, and the city geotechnical engineer, he says, yeah, this is probably the best because those other walls will just hold the slope. They are not in favor of big retaining walls.
Right.
This way we can step down into and all of this is crawl space behind. There's no usage behind just the garage. If we push this back, I think we could, with potentially, of course, more excavation and so on. But if this is, I don't know, this is the last resort, we can look into that.
Okay. Well, the more, yeah, I mean, I think the more things that you can do to not have a big broad-sided garage right on the front facing portion of the home is going to help.
As I say, you know, we could discuss with the owner and so on, and we could reduce to one-car garage. Although there are many two-car garages over there, in front of the building, not like we showed behind, but in front.
The only thing with the one-car garage, and you have a family that has 6 bedrooms,
Yes.
I don't know if the planning department would be too conducive to a one-car garage.
Right,
for a house of this
because
size.
we
wouldn't have any restriction on,
You don't?
our off-street parking requirements are going to be pretty minimal for something like this.
Oh, okay.
That doesn't mean that they can't, I mean, there's a minimum, right? But there's a big
Okay.
range that
Well, I
is
hope-
permitted.
Since there's a commercial use, does
Commercial?
that
Yeah.
So
change
yeah, so the commercial use would have some required parking, I'm guessing,
it's 1.5, I think, or something like this.
as a office. It's about, what, 1,500 square feet total?
The office,
The commercial space?
it's 900,
900.
935.
Yeah, so maybe 2 or 3 spaces. And then the single-family home actually doesn't have any parking requirements itself. So really, I think 3
Oh.
spaces, and you can count on-street parking, which Fifth Street has on-street parking right there, I believe.
It does?
We could park on the street. It means two more cars on the street.
There's a bike lane.
I think there's a
And
parking
behind.
lane as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
You just don't usually see cars parked along there, you know, oftentimes.
Right.
But okay.
We were trying to avoid, although we could maybe park somewhere on the street, but we were trying to avoid as if possible.
In this plan, what's the distance from the front of the garage to the curb?
Yeah, I can
Fifth
take
Street.
a look. Yeah.
Do you know?
I don't have
Setback on the
I don't
front.
have a site plan that's current.
20 feet.
20 feet.
Okay. So that meets the minimum standards. However, again, we didn't want to push too much to the back
Because
we are
in. Yeah.
very steep and simply very expensive, but also not in favor if we have to build huge retaining walls.
I just wanted to pull up the page that shows some Foursquare examples since we talked about that.
There you go. Those are commercial. No,
So
they're not.
these are the examples of Foursquares that are in our design guidelines. So they generally have a centralized, stairway entry up to a porch, and then the half story on top is a half story with dormers generally.
Yes, we could modify the front elevation like this, and the site was simply dictated, as I say. The neighbor is kind of, I don't know if it is even modern, contemporary, the Guild Mortgage, this building, and basically the owners would prefer to have view on that side, more windows, bigger windows. Well, we can eliminate, more than happy, eliminate some of the windows and match the style. That's not an issue, or shouldn't be an issue. We need to. And also we can center the entrance. The entrance, if we look at the elevation, is a little bit different thing, but but we could make at least the bottom level, center, and the upper. We would have to cut the square footage, however. We need out of this 3-bedroom, that front side, make it like a 2-story. The dormers, we definitely need to cut the upper level, which is for the owner. The main level is for mostly the family. She's taking care of elderly mother and some sisters. It's a big family.
Difficult challenge.
If we make recommendations, since this is design advice, then does it have to come back to us, or can you with our,
So I have been taking notes, so there's video of this, of course, and then I've been taking notes that I would then share with the applicant. And design advice is non-binding. I should have started with this, but it's informal, non-binding, so anything that's said here tonight does not necessarily mean that it's going to be like that in the future. And the board members are giving their individual advice and not as a board. So I would share the notes, and then of course you have access to the video of this meeting that you can always go back and review. And then you can turn in your application, and you would come back to the board for an actual public hearing.
When that would be?
Whenever you turn in an application and it's complete, we would schedule you for the next hearing.
But I was told in December there's no hearing. Is that true?
That's correct. So the next hearing is January 28th, I believe. And if you turn in your application before the end of December, then you can make that deadline.
Okay. So let me ask you, is it any possibility to keep the floor plans? If we can maybe show the upper floor. Yes, so this is the upper floor, the 2 bedrooms facing the street, and the master bedroom behind. If you suggest that we cut the roof, we will reduce this 2-bedroom or maybe eliminate.
So
and have just one master.
Generally speaking, we don't review the interior layout.
Yeah.
It's really just the exterior. So obviously the exterior will have an impact on how you can lay out the interior.
But just to give you an idea, and I'm looking for your input or suggestion, if we can save this floor plan going in together with what you just said.
I think it can be done. But within the 4-square general design, I think there's adequate precedent around the city for a structure of this size.
Yeah, as I say, a window or siding, trimming, it's no problem with that. The problem is with the floor plans that would serve the family needs. If we can keep these floor plans, then we can work on the elevations to meet the requirements.
I might just say that if you're going to use the 4-square style, there might need to be some tweaks to the floor plan just to accommodate that. I think it would be tough to keep it exactly as it is. That just seems pretty challenging if you're going to totally change the exterior design. So you might be able to get the same amount of bedrooms, but the layout might change a little bit, and the sizes might change a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think regarding the siding, the vertical boards, there's I'd be hard pressed to think of.
Yeah,
with
we have
vertical
no, we have
siding
no
that
issue with
goes
this. There's
horizontal.
no problem about that.
So horizontal better.
Yeah.
Horizontal
I think
siding would
so.
be more appropriate.
Yeah, simple, just,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, all the architectural details, whether it's the knee braces, the shingles, everything, I would pick the major style first and then,
go from there.
yeah,
Mhm.
work your way down. Because I think you'll
Yeah,
find,
okay.
if you just follow the examples, but.
So at the bottom line is we can keep the garage as it is and the studio up in front.
Well, no, I don't think there's any, like Kelly described there, all the advice is non-binding from this meeting here. So I would take into account all the suggestions and comments we made about the garage. So I think the more you can do to mitigate the garage, the better chance you'll have of getting it approved. But it's, at least in my personal opinion, I'm not particularly in favor of the attached garage there.
And just the way, keep in mind, because of the massing, when I first looked at it, it's so busy, and which draws attention to the massing in and of itself.
Yeah.
And so by keeping it a simpler design and elements, architectural elements on the exterior helps to kind of
Okay, yeah, I agree.
downplay the size.
And there's no problem with this, as I say, no problem. And of course, we can remove the gable up in front, change the shape of the roof. This way.
Keep it more.
Yeah, because that would
because
be
that
a
kind
hip roof.
Yes.
right, and that kind of brings it down.
Yeah.
You want it to hug the ground more than
Correct.
Elevate.
Yes.
And also with Foursquare, it's very what's the word? Even on both sides. Symmetrical. Thank you. As opposed to with other styles, this is a lot more asymmetrical.
The two upper floors, the windows are symmetrical. The bottom we can rearrange and have the front entrance. That's no problem. The front entrance in the middle.
And then just having like 1/1 or like 6/1 windows as opposed to
9/1.
9/1. Again, that downplays the busyness of it. So just having, and 1/1 windows are a lot, and you get a lot more light, and and they're a lot cheaper.
Shall we move on to the other location?
Let me ask you, okay, so, I guess that would be probably, if we come up with a preliminary, according to these guidelines, would you be able informally give suggestion or advice before
you could go through another round of design advice if you wanted to in January before you would submit your application. If you want to revise the design and then come back for more advice. Alternatively, I'm happy to look at it and provide you my comments based on the guidelines, so that you don't have to take another month out of your schedule. But you come to the board with a design, and a lot of times there are conditions of approval. The board requires some tweaks here and there to the design, and then so they approve it with some changes. And so that, it doesn't have to be 100% perfect upon your application submittal.
Basically, I guess my question is, okay, how to simplify and speed up the process? Otherwise, talking 2 months, another month, before we even,
We understand that. And again, the process of the design review is intended to do exactly that. Thing is, we have a lot of experience in dealing not just with the applicants, but with the public in general. And we can anticipate what kind of public comments are going to come, what the reactions will be to a design that you put in front of us. And that's what we're trying to do, is guide you in a direction that's compatible with the public input that we would anticipate based on how long we've been doing this. So we don't want you to come in here with a plan that is likely to stir up a lot of emotion and public opposition, because that's going to slow you down.
Okay. Yeah,
Well,
thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, and I think also that Kelly, she knows her stuff really good.
True.
And, she's hearing what we're saying and able to translate that and look at your plans and say, yes, you're going in the right direction, as opposed to that probably won't be successful. So,
Yeah. Okay.
having staff review would help
that
a
would
lot.
help
And I think
speed
that would
up.
definitely
Okay.
speed it up.
Sounds good. Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And then part two.
Part two.
This one should be
Part two.
easier because the design is very similar to what the board has already approved.
I'm glad to see something happening there.
Yeah.
After many years.
So this is 7th and, is that Monroe?
Oh, no.
No.
So this is the
Adam? No.
site here on the corner of 7th. So there's a existing parking lot behind that would serve the new building. And here we go. So these are the 4 documents that you sent me just now. Want to look at, we have elevations, rear and front. Here we go. So there's an existing historic building next door that is a multifamily structure.
Behind
All
it.
right, let's get. And so the design of this building is meant to kind of play off of that one. It has these 2 symmetrical elements on the historic building. So is this the front here? Can you tell me?
We will call it front, yes.
That would be, so that would be on 7th.
Yes, because it's on 7th.
Okay, and I think what we talked about is moving the entry to 7th.
Correct. Which
And
is
that
no
would
problem.
be the rear. And then we've got the Monroe Street side here. The entry for the commercial space would move to 7th as a requirement probably for this board and for site plan design review requirements. And then this is the facade that would face that neighboring building. And so it's built with almost 0 setback, which is historically appropriate, and it is probably matches what used to be there.
I remember the drugstore.
So this design is very, very similar to what was submitted in 2014 to the board, and it was, I believe that was approved at the time, and then the application, the approval has expired at this point.
Oh, so there was another,
Mm-hmm.
that was before
There was
I came back on the
in
board.
2012, there was
Yeah.
a 3-story
Before I
design
retired.
that was approved, and then in 2014, it was modified to a 2-story design, similar to what you see here, and that was approved. And then the applicant didn't move past that stage, and now they're back with this is a very, very similar plan.
Yeah, and I think the compatibility with the neighboring design speaks strongly in favor of that.
Mm-hmm. The style, yeah. Yeah, because it's got multiple roofs and dormers and stuff like that.
So as on my end, I don't really have any major comments on this. There was one item, I think, we have a ground floor retail space, like minimum floor to ceiling height. And that sometimes gets reduced to be proportional to neighboring historic buildings. And so I think that would probably be the case here, where you wouldn't want a huge, really tall ground floor, because you're trying to mimic the building next door. But
although it kind of sits up.
Yeah, so there might be a slight reduction, allowance to reduce that height, but probably not by a lot.
Looks like 11 feet.
Oh, yeah. So the right elevation, those windows would be more where the commercial area is going to be. Am I correct?
Yes.
And that's, okay.
Yeah, we will call
Which
it
seems
front
more
because,
appropriate for
yeah, we will
commercial.
call it front because that street, I think, it's more important. Right?
Oh yeah, it's a main thoroughfare.
It's a larger. Yeah.
So commercial building styles in the guidelines talk about multi-story buildings where the first, the ground floor height must be at least 12 feet. Unless for multifamily use, then maybe 10 feet. So the commercial space, according to the guidelines, would have to be 12 feet. And then upper floor to floor heights, at least 10 feet.
We have 11 feet and 8 feet. And do we know what the dimensions are on the building next door?
The building next door is sitting below at least 4 feet, 4 to 5 feet lower than this. So we propose to reduce the commercial space requirement from 12 to 11 feet. And the upper floor also, so this 2-story is not going to be taller than the neighbor too much.
Yeah, and I think that's a good thought because you don't want to dominate, overpower it. Yeah. If does a variance have to be granted to do that?
Not necessarily.
We don't do variances.
Yeah, no.
In other cases, we've handled it through what we call a modification, where the design better meets, if the design better meets the historic guidelines, then it can be considered a modification that better meets the standard. And no variance required.
I don't have.
So I like it.
Thank you.
Nice to have something on that spot. Cool.
Great.
Yeah, I think it's pretty good, pretty close, I think, to what would fit there.
There you have it.
And I like the window difference, with the commercial and the residential, to where it really defines it. Cool.
All right then.
Yeah. The owner used to work for the pharmacy.
The what?
The owner used to work for the pharmacy.
Oh, you're kidding. That was where we went all the time. It was right up the street. Huh. informative.
Well,
Thank
thank
you.
you very much for your suggestions and advice. We will try to implement those changes. Yeah.
Okay.
All right, thanks.
Thank
We'll
you
be in
very
touch.
much. Yeah. You have a good night.
The next item on our agenda is the meeting minutes from.
Oh, gosh.
Sorry, there's actually one agenda item that was split on the 2 pages of the agenda, so it's easy to miss. 4B.
Oh,
The what?
City Commission direction to review definitions of new construction and demolition.
Ew.
We have, fortunately enough, we have a staff report.
So this kind of stemmed from a project in McLaughlin, a non-designated structure that had an addition built that changed the character of the home and appeared to be almost an entire new second story, but in reality technically met the definition, or technically was less than 30% of the size of the original home, and so it didn't quite meet that threshold of new construction, so it didn't have to go to you for review. So when you have a undesignated structure in McLaughlin, so probably 60% of the homes in McLaughlin that are not designated, if they're making alterations or smaller additions, then they don't have to be reviewed by the board. If they're making larger additions, which we call 30% of the original square footage or greater, then it's considered new construction and it has to come to the board for review. So this house was kind of looked like a one-story house that actually had a lot of living space in the attic, and then they built kind of a bigger, much larger second story. And turns out the addition was only 19%, but the appearance of it was much different than the design of the original home, and it looked a lot larger, and so people reacted to that and thought that maybe it would be worth it to revisit our definition of new construction, to see if it's, something we might want to change. Maybe 30% is a little high, or maybe we could define it in a different way. So the city commission wanted the board to discuss that, not tonight. I'm just kind of introducing it. We'll have
oh my God.
We'll have a work session
about our pillows.
Yeah, so we'll have a work session in January for this. And then the definition of demolition as well. They wanted us to look at the same project that I just described. Also was almost completely demolished and then rebuilt with the same footprint within a larger second story. So I think we want to, the commission wanted the board to kind of consider the definition of demolition and when demolition review is needed. Now, our code does not require demolition review for a non-designated structure. So lots of structures in McLaughlin could be demolished if they're not designated without board review. And then lastly, I don't know if this was in the staff report, but we've talked before about major public improvements. So when the city is making improvements to the streets, or when we did the 7th Street streetscape, we've talked about some items in Kenema that gets reviewed by the board when it's in the historic districts. That is also very not well defined, that term, a major public improvement. So I think at the same time we talk about these other things, we maybe could also talk about how what we consider to be a major public improvement, and maybe what's minor enough that you don't want to review those. Because at this point, we kind of come to you and ask even for little stuff, because we just want to make sure.
But isn't that with staff review? I mean, on some of that?
Yeah, so, but we don't really have HRB
Policy
policies
on that, okay.
for that, so, yeah, so we're in a bit of a conundrum when we have small improvements in the right of way that seem insignificant to some people, but then other people it seems very significant. So, and major public improvements also include private improvements that are built in the public right of way. So if someone gets a right of way obstruction permit to build, Kanema right of ways are 60 feet wide, right? So a lot of people have like a lot of yard space in the right of way, and they want to build a fence or they want to build a shed or something, and so that could be potentially considered a major public improvement as well. And so, the question is, when do we want to review that, and when don't we? When do we think we need to? When it affects the, character of the district. So we'll have that discussion in January, and
Sounds
I'll
like
provide
more than one work session.
Maybe. We'll start that discussion in January. Right. The other thing to know is you all wrote a letter of support for us for a grant for us to update our comprehensive plan. So we I don't know if we found out about the second grant, but we won the first grant. I think we either got the second grant or we probably will. We haven't found out yet. And so we plan to start the comprehensive plan update next year. That will be a very broad look. We're going to look at the big picture of everything, including historic preservation. And then that update to the comprehensive plan would likely result in a lot of implementation projects. So changing codes here, changing guidelines here, changing processes and programs, the city has as a result of, new goals and policies of the comprehensive plan. So if this issue of new construction and demolition is larger than just a work session or two, it might be more appropriate to be kind of addressed through this larger comprehensive plan process. But I think we want to have the conversation in January and maybe talk through that a little bit. So just a heads up.
Okay.
No action needed from you now.
Which we're really good at. No action. Okay. Minutes of meetings from December 4th and January 22nd, a year ago, almost. Has everybody had the opportunity?
I read them, but God, I don't remember some of this stuff. It's like, that's too far along ago. I didn't see any glaring.
Yeah, it all looked fine to me.
And it looked fine to me. I didn't have any corrections on any of them.
I move that we approve the HRB minutes from December 4th work session and meeting, and also the December 4th, 2018 work session and meeting minutes, and then also the January 22nd, 2019 work session and meeting minutes.
I'll second that motion.
Board Member Met.
Aye.
Board Member Blythe.
Aye.
And Chair Basinger.
Aye.
Great.
Woohoo. Oh,
the minutes are approved. Communication.
So in addition to our work session in January, I think we'll be talking about the CLG grant. So it's been 2 years since we last applied for a CLG grant. So we'll need to submit an application in February for another grant, and these are $12,000 from the state that can fund educational programs or events related to preservation. It can fund parts of our regulatory preservation program, and so we would I'd be kind of coming up with the projects that I think make sense for the next 2 years, and then presenting that to you for your feedback before we would work on a grant application. And I will also have some updates from SHPO. There's a lot of stuff that's been going on at the state level with code updates, rule updates that we will need to address. So I will have some information for you then as well. No meeting in December.
For that. Cool. Okay.
You said no meeting?
We will not have a meeting in December.
Oh, I thought you said, for some reason, I thought you said no meeting in summer. And I'm like, what? That's why I'm like, huh?
Well, you guys might get off, for the spring while I'm gone.
Yeah.
I don't know. We'll see if any applications
Christina
come in.
said, shtick.
Okay. With that, we will adjourn the meeting and
Great.
say good night to our vast viewing audience at home.